We're not out there fighting anything other than crime.
We see stuff that nobody should have to
Put
see.
your hands back! Hands it back! Hands it back! Go!
Get out of it, man. Get out of it! Get out of it!
Don't move! Don't move!
George 31, erect out.
Don't go! Don't go! Don't go!
Put it in paper. You're going to jail. Where else do you think you're going?
You're listening to The Beat, profiles of police nationwide. You know, I was telling tonight's guest when I was shooting the breeze with them off air, behind the scenes, as we normally do with our guests before we get on the air. I've had a state police individual on the program before, Lieutenant J. Paul Vance, retired out of the Connecticut State Police, who was on this program. And that was a great conversation about a year and change ago. I want to say about almost 2 years ago, actually. But I've never dived into the New York State Police until tonight. And it's one of the toughest agencies to get into, as we were talking about. That academy is no joke. But it's also one of the more unique agencies that are out there, because you think of New York naturally, especially if you're from outside the area, maybe you're from an entirely different part of the world. You think, New York City. Or if you're closer to the state of New York, like ourselves here in Connecticut or Mass, you think New York City, you think Long Island, maybe even Buffalo. You don't think about the rest of the state. And remember, they have the whole state. So we'll talk about that tonight. If you haven't checked out the previous episode, that was my pal Joe Badalamante, retired NYPD officer, who came back to talk about, of course, something that helped him therapy-wise in the aftermath of a very personal loss he suffered, a couple personal losses he suffered in his life. The last two shows were mental health shows, which was good. I don't mind doing those, and I'll always do those, because that's an important thing to talk about, especially within the first responder community. It's good to see everybody that's tuning in for this Wednesday edition. Like I said, just for those of you that may have missed it, the way my current place of employment works is that mandatory overtime that you get held over for is a thing. So you think you're going to be leaving when your shift ends, and all of a sudden, because of last minute changes, you end up getting held. So what I don't want is obviously shows to get derailed and disrupted and canceled last minute, because I think I'm getting ready to go home, get out of the job. And then instead of doing 8 hours, I'm doing 16. So Mondays, I'll be coming off working my doubles. So you can't get held after a double. And Tuesdays, Wednesdays, I'm off. So Wednesdays, of course, it's my day off. So it doesn't affect the program at all. So this will be done for the foreseeable future. And then hopefully once I get the employment I'm really after, which you guys know I'm pursuing, then we'll go back to our regular schedule. All right, so let's run a couple of ads. I don't want to keep my guests waiting too long. And the first one is going to be from my pal over at Armor Tuff, Vince D'Arienzo. When it comes to firehouses, the floors take a beating. Boots, waters, tools, apparatus traffic, it just never stops. That's why departments like the Gloucester City, New Jersey Fire Department and so many others trust Armor Tuff Flooring and Tile. From the hallways to the training rooms to the apparatus bays, Armor Tuff delivers a clean, professional finish built to handle the daily grind of the job. Durable, seamless, and designed specifically for high-demand public safety environments, this isn't just flooring, it's infrastructure you can count on. And it doesn't stop at the floor. Take a look at the Grove's Gear Racks, built with integrated security features to protect turnout gear, personal equipment, and department assets. Secure storage, smart design, and built to last, because your gear deserves the same protection you provide to your community. If your department is ready to upgrade its space from the bay floor to the gear room, reach out to Armor Tuff Flooring and Tile, built for the fire service, built to last. Always on the go, by the way, too, and definitely always hard at work. Like I said it before, I'll say it again. He's busier in retirement than he was when he was on the job, which is saying something, because he was really busy when he was on the job, considering where he worked. And that, of course, is my pal Billy Ryan. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the Elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike to New Haven podcast. Okay, for this volume 23 of The Beat, Let's do it. My next guest has built a career that spans nearly every layer of the criminal justice system. Started out in corrections, which is something in its own right. Then into the ranks of course, the New York court officers, a very underrated job, as we'll talk about, because he did it for a couple of years. And then the ranks of the New York State Police, where he worked complex investigations involving organized crime, labor racketeering, and major violent cases. And we're talking seriously violent cases, including one in particular, which involved a quintuple homicide. And along the way, he uncovered corruption within his own agency, earned some of the department's highest honors, and was the first investigator on scene for that quintuple homicide, as he'll tell me about. That case was solved within days. And after retiring, he decided to take on the classroom after taking on the streets, where he teaches, of course, and also writing too. His book, The Badge Between Us, Duty, Marriage, and Family, will be a point of discussion tonight as well. And that for this volume 23 of The Beat, profiles police nationwide, retired out of the New York State Police, and of course, a veteran of corrections and courts too, is Mr. Terry Dwyer. Terry, welcome. How are you?
Good evening, Mike. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you being here. So before we get into anything involving your extensive career in law enforcement, it's a lot, as I mentioned in the introduction. Tell me about where you grew up.
Oh, I grew up in the Bronx, in the North Bronx, Woodlawn. My family moved off the concourse when I was about 2 years old, and we moved up to the Bronx, and that's where pretty much myself and my brother were raised. Didn't move out of there till I was in college, just shortly actually before I went on corrections. We moved up to Westchester County, but I was in the Bronx till I was 20.
Guys of a certain age, I always cover this with guys from your generation. You know, you grew up and within certain communities throughout the city, or even out on the island, depending where, you had your mothers, your fathers, and just people from the community in general saying, hey, kid, take the test, take the sanitation test, take the fire test, take the PD test. You know, you don't got to take the job, but take the test because it's a good job, stable benefits, pension, the whole nine. Was that the type of case with you back then?
No, not really. My dad was an attorney, but my dad was tail end of career Navy vet. He had been a court officer. He'd been an IRS agent. He went to law school on undergrad and law school on the GI Bill. So he was always pushing me to go to law school. I'm the one that came up with, I might want to do the job because when I was a kid, he was a court officer. And then my uncle was also, he retired as a captain in correction. And then it was all around me growing up in the neighborhood. So not so much pushed at my parents' end, but definitely an influence.
Now, and we'll get into it because, I mean, as I just had chronicled with my friend Bob Cower, who worked corrections ESU, it's a very hard job and a job that, as we made mention of, you're doing without a sidearm. So it's an even harder job. And from that standpoint, was corrections the only test you took?
No, I'd taken everything. I was on 2 NYPD lists. I took 1175 tests and 4061, which is ironic because that ended up being my badge number in the state police, 4061. I took the Port Authority test. I took Rockland Towns and Villages. I just missed the Westchester test, which bummed me out. And I had taken the Metro North test. So I had gotten called by Metro North, but also the same day as my state police processing. And I had gotten called by the NYPD, and I was in the middle of processing with that while I was on, just before I went on correction. But somehow it kind of slowed down, which was rare. They gave another test because they were afraid they'd run out, but then it was like that loop, and that's when state police called me.
Gotcha. And of course, we'll talk about that period of time coming up in 85, but 83 to 85 represents a very interesting experience on two ends, one with the courts, one, of course, with corrections. You got in February of 83, you go through the training, and the training, I'm sure, is extensive, especially nowadays, but it doesn't prepare you for the real thing until you're living the real thing. And being in Rikers back then, this is when Rikers was Rikers. So tell me about essentially what amounted to baptism by fire over there.
Yeah, it was a trip. I was a junior in college. I was 20 years old, and we had on-the-job training. So you didn't graduate the academy without having a taste of it. But it was only 1 week, and how much are you going to do or see? But you did get to know the routine and know a little bit of the rhythms. The real test is when you start getting put in the tiers or the housing units on your own, and you're pretty much running a housing unit as a young officer, or you're doing the midnights and you're doing the intake, the processing, all the arrestees that put in on bail that are now coming out of the the different boroughs, the different courthouses and the precinct holding cells. So you learn real quick. And I said throughout my career, there's a part of me that thinks every police officer should do at least a year or 2 years in corrections, because you really learn those needed skills out on the street. You learn to communicate. That's really your only weapon. I mean, you have your defensive tactics that you learn. You have your, back then we had the red dots, the push buttons, emergency system. But it's how you carry yourself and how you communicate with the individuals that you're there guarding. That's really going to dictate how well you're going to do as an officer.
Right. And it's a fine line, as me and Bob Coward talked about a couple weeks ago when he was on, where you want to obviously make sure that you communicate that level of respect and maintain that dialogue in a way that's going to be civil, considering the fact that communication is your greatest weapon. It's your mind in that situation that can allow you to get through each tour. But at the same time, you want to make sure that line is maintained to where you're not a pushover and they're not going to be requesting special things, getting special favors, and all of a sudden they're owning you and not the other way around. They're running the things and not the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely. And real quick, I can give you a quick anecdote. I was a young officer and I was in the Anna M. Cross Center, which was known as C95. And there was an inmate who was, mostly disturbed, and he got into a beef with another inmate. Long story short is he picked up one of those kind of metal Corecraft chairs and was coming after the other inmate. I was in between them. I wasn't the desk officer of the day. I was in amongst the population. And I grabbed the first thing I could, another inmate, and put him between me and the other guy because he was coming full bore with his metal chair. But it was two others that were in there that grabbed the guy and held him until the CERT unit came, the emergency response unit. So later, after all the smoke cleared and everything was calmed down, I went to a guy, and I've been talking to him earlier. He was facing a minimum 8.5-year bid upstate for armed robbery. And I said, hey, thanks, but let me ask you, why'd you do that? And he said to me, he says, we were talking earlier. You were cool. You treated me like a man, gave me respect. I'll give you respect back. And I said, I appreciate that. But then he added, plus, CO, if you go down, we're all going down. So there's a little bit of, self-preservation there on his and the other one's part. But that really stuck with me. It was based upon he deemed me to be straight up, and in dealing with him and the other inmates in that housing area that day. And this was towards the end of the shift, obviously. Things always jump off at the end of your shift, right? You can have a good quiet day and they jump off at the end. And that stuck with me. And that kind of also became a model for, all right, how you treat people, what you give is what you get back.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And I feel like back then, not to give criminals too much credit, they're there for a reason. But back then compared to now, there kind of was an understanding where, hey, basically, for lack of a better way to word it, at the end of the day, it's just business. There was more of a level. I don't want to say they had a conscience per se, because there was more respect, if you know what I'm getting at. Yeah,
I mean, look, COs were getting jumped back then, and they were getting, stabbed and everything else.
Right.
So
yeah,
it was there, but this was a guy. Here's what I think the real difference was. He was in his early 30s. He'd been around. He was more mature. Now, if I was in the juvenile, there was a separate juvenile facility. Nobody wanted to work there. That place was bedlam, 24/7 bedlam. So probably would not have had the same results. So there is that maturation. And you talk to anybody I've talked to who's been a state CO, correction officer, and they've been around a long time. They'll tell you the guys who are in there and they're older. They've done they've done a decade and a half. They're looking to get out in another 5 or something like that. They're not your troublemakers. It's the young ones coming in, and it's still bringing in some of that nonsense from the street that gets carried over.
Trying to prove themselves.
Yeah. So, and look, correction is a tough job. I've always respected our correction officers, and even when I was on the state police, because we'd respond to state facilities for crimes and things that happened, and even when I was in uniform, I stopped the correction officer. Lots of times, cops give them a hard time. Well, you're not on my job. You know what? You're doing a tough job. I respect the job. I know what it's like. And kudos to you for doing that.
Yeah, I give him all the credit in the world.
Absolutely.
Talking with Terry Dwyer here on the Mike the New Haven podcast. This is volume 23 of the Beat Profiles of Police Nationwide. Terry's a veteran of New York Corrections, also New York Courts, and of course, most notably the New York State Police. Christian Williams, just a shout out to our friends tuning in tonight that I can see in the chat. Good evening to you, sir. It's definitely a nice night. It's beautiful outside. We're going to have 75-degree weather next week, although it's going to be raining. We'll take it. Don Gonzalez is here. Joe Maliga. And Joe, you were a CO2 up in the Rochester area, so he gets it. And watching via Facebook is Kurt Beck, who says, New York State Police basic session 204 here. Best job in the world. So good to see you, Kurt. Congratulations to you, sir, on completing that training. And thanks for all you did in your course over the course of your career. Last note on corrections before transitioning to courts. Compared to, well, when you went to the Bronx, compared to Rikers, busier, more challenging, or just the opposite?
Different facility, because now Bronx House was a vertical facility. Right. So it was five stories, 6 stories. I think it was 6. And on the 6th floor, you had all the special detainees. That was pretty cool because we had an outside patrol, and I used to love getting it where you walk the beat around the area, and used to have the old Bronx Terminal Market down there. Back in the day, sometimes if you got assigned, you'd be working the Yankee game. So that was always nice. The city cops come park their cars in the correction lot, and you'd watch them. But it was a different vibe. It was a different facility, being vertical type of structure. Interestingly enough, we had 2 high profile prisoners there. One was one of the Brinks armed robbery suspects, who his name before he converted to Islam was Donald Weems, that killed the 2 officers on the Tappan Zee Bridge, 2 NIAC officers. And then the other was an organized crime figure who did a mob hit, and it was well known. The ramifications went to the Reagan White House at the time. But that mob hit happened in my neighborhood, and I was there with a lot of other onlookers shortly after it happened, not realizing that, within a few months I would be in a facility and watching one of the individuals involved in that hit.
Can you, if you can't, don't worry about it, but not the person itself, but right. As far as the hit, who was the hit on?
The hit was on an individual by the name of Maselli, and his father was mobbed up, but there was a whole thing going on with the Secretary of Labor at the time, Donovan. He was in the cabinet, and it was the whole WedTech scandal, and a Bronx state senator got kind of wrapped into it. The federal official, I think he was acquitted by a jury, but there was just a lot of things going on with the New York City construction industry, just a lot of different political stuff in the background. So, and it probably really wasn't even a planned hit per se. It seemed like it was kind of a hit gone wrong, in that it wasn't really planned. It kind of happened because I think they discovered he was wearing a wire.
Okay. All right. Definitely interesting story, and the subplot within a lot of things that were going on with the mob in the 70s and 80s in New York City. Now, you can make a career out of corrections if you want to. I just talked to a guy who did. But a lot of people tend to treat a job like that as a stepping stone because their ambition coming in is something higher. We know what it was in your case, or guys that want to go to the NYPD. There's plenty of guys that went to the NYPD back then and still now that got their start in corrections. When courts came along, I mean, a couple of years in corrections, you got your feet wet, that's for sure. Courts came along, that's a whole different ballgame. And like we were talking about off air, people underrate that job and don't understand what those guys do.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely use correction as a stepping stone. I used to work midnights at the Bronx House, and I would look out, 3 a.m. and see the RMP, the local sector car from the 4-4 go rolling by, and like, that's where I want to be. That's where I want to be. But I was also in college. I was still in the fall semester of my junior year when I actually spring semester, and then ended up going into my fall. And I wanted to finish college. That was really important to me. And I couldn't get the steady shift that I wanted on corrections. And I had taken the court test with all the other tests. So courts came up and they called. And my father had been a court officer prior to him going to the Internal Revenue Service, Treasury agent, and then eventually becoming a lawyer. So I knew something about it. And I worked at the Bronx Criminal Courthouse night arraignments, which was a real. It was fun. It was a fun time in the Bronx. There was a lot going on, needless to say. So I did about 11 months in correction before I went to the courts. And, that was kind of seamless because you have so much interaction with the correction people because they're in the pens. So they're literally coming from them to us and maybe back to them or whatever. So there's a lot of interaction with correction. So it helped me in that I knew the correction end of things. And then we had a lot of interaction with the PD, with the arraignment cops. So I got to work with some old timers who were just fantastic, and listening to their stories, guys who are housing cops, transit cops, NYPD, but just listening to their stories. And I learned a lot, even just about being a cop from them. Mm-hmm. It was like one of the best, mini academy you could go through. But the courts is an excellent job. It's changed so much from when I was on it, but they do a lot more than people expect. They're not just in the courthouse, doing it during the sessions, handing the judge papers and whatnot. They're doing court security, and they're actually doing warrants, which we were doing a little bit, but not a lot. They have their own emergency service unit. They have their own training academy. So the job is developed. The court officer job is developed quite a bit. Yeah, no, a very, very good job. I mean, I want what I want in the public safety world, but if you're looking to go the police route, that's not a bad route to go. And like we talked about, some of you may know, some of you may not. On the morning of 9/11, in total, 63 police officers died on that terrible morning. We know 37 from the Port Authority Police, 23 from the NYPD Police, or New York City Police, I should say. But those other 3 were court officers, a captain and 2 officers who responded heroically to the Trade Center and helped evacuate several people and gave their lives that morning. So they do a lot. And definitely, I have a good buddy of mine. His son's about to get called to the academy for it, and he's going to have a great time. That's a really, really good job. It's a really good job. It's a tight job. And, they're peace officers under New York state law, but they do carry. There's a special section for the stop and frisk, essentially, in the criminal procedure law that covers court officers and the courthouses. And, you're making arrests on that job. There's I made lots of arrests. My buddy and I that were on the job, and we always process them through the 4-4 precinct. So nice. Or we were at Lincoln Hospital, which if any of your listeners are familiar with Lincoln Hospital, back in the day, it was a bucket of blood. That place, the ER, and it was quite busy. And I have stories from that emergency room where many a time we're in there with prisoners that need medical attention, or people that we arrested in the courts or just outside the area of the courts. So, quick asides before we get to where you graduated to with the New York State Police. A year apart almost, May of '84, commendation, a robbery arrest after a foot pursuit. And then May of '85, another commendation, a weapons arrest during a knife incident involving gangs. Tell us about the first one. Yeah, the first one, back then, they had these jackets, these leather jackets with an 8-ball in the back. They're called 8-ball jackets, and they have multicolored the leather jackets, right? Yeah. So this kid gets jacked up for his jacket in the holding pens, right? They're ready to come out for arraignments. And it was this dude who just got out on parole. He gets out on parole from the state system after serving like 8 years. He's held on a BS warrant. He comes to arraignment, click, time served, he's out of there. So nobody pays any mind. He's got on an 8-ball jacket, right? So now about a half hour later, this kid comes out of the pen, and his father's there. The kid gets released, and then he's complaining to my buddy. He's like, "Hey, this dude stole my jacket. He beat the snot out of me in the holding cell, and he stole my jacket." So my buddy calls me because we had the area patrol. I go downstairs, and just as the kid and the father were talking to him, he goes, "There he goes now." The parolee is strolling in the front of the courthouse, like with a bag of chips and a soda, and he like sees us, does a double take, and he rabbits. He's gone. So me and my buddy take off after him, up 161st. We're on the Grand Concourse. The guy's gone. And there's a janitor in one of the buildings there who's kind of like giving us the side eye. And the guy jumps out from the bushes. We chase him across the Grand Concourse. At least I did. My buddy was smarter. he commandeered a cab because all of a sudden I'm chasing him across the park, in front of All Hallows. We're going down by Yankee Stadium. We're getting to the train. I'm like, oh, I hope he doesn't, hit the train, but I'm gaining on him. All of a sudden I see my buddy out of the left corner of my eye come out of nowhere, flying tackles the guy. I get on top of him and we cuff him. I'm like, where'd you come from? He goes, I commandeered a cab. So then we walked the guy back and the guy, and yeah, we had him for robbery, and he ended up going back upstate for that one. And then, so let me just preface this. There was obviously a lot of drugs in the Bronx at the time. We had an attorney, a private defense attorney, get pretty much assassinated. He was set up, and it was right across the street from the courthouse. And it was a drug hit. Apparently, he stole some money from one of the drug crews. And there was a lot of violence even going around that area around the courthouse. So one day, my partner and I, we're just outside, just checking, and we hear a little bit of a ruckus. It's across the street at the bus stop, and there's like 3 or 4 legal aid attorneys, and they're just standing like right off the curb in the middle of the street, and they're like just frozen still. And there's these two dudes in the middle of a knife fight, and they're using the attorneys as like a barrier. So my buddy and I did what we had to do. We came out, drew down on them, took them into custody, and brought them into the facility, and got them processed and arraigned and put inside. But it was kind of a wild time. It was a wild time in and around the court. So yeah, it was busier than anyone would expect. And then of course we arrested 2 young ladies once. They had a beef with these other ladies. That was the days when they were throwing lye in individuals' faces. Jeez. A lot of weapons arrests in the courts. Whether it's a knife, whether it's anything under the 265 of the penal law. Little derringers, guns, and stuff like that. And that was before really we had the magnetometers. That was, I think they only had them back in those days that I recall, maybe in the family court.
And it's not, to say that New York City was just every part of New York City, that is to say, was the complete Wild West. During this era, you had parts of the city that were calm, tranquil, relatively peaceful. The Bronx was just not one of them. So.
Yeah, well, I lived, again, like I said, I was living in Woodlawn still at the time. Woodlawn was beautiful. It's still a wonderful neighborhood from 233rd to 241st, from Katona up to Van Cortlandt. And then you also had nice sections of Riverdale.
Exactly.
But back then you still had the 4-1, the Fort Apache, the 4-0, the 4-3. These are all busy precincts. The 5-2 even had parts that were busy. The 4-7, 4-6 off the Ryer Avenue Station House. Yeah, the Bronx was a busy borough, just like Brooklyn, just like Queens. They were all busy.
Yeah.
Back then. And you look at the homicide rates in the early 90s when I was working in the city with the state police, homicide rates were like 2,200 a year.
Mm-hmm. You remember the motto from the 7-5 over in Brooklyn: you give us 22 minutes, we'll give you a homicide. That's
absolute. And later when we talk about the state police, I'll tell you a story out of the 7-5.
Oh, for sure. So 84, December of 84, really to September of 85, you were quite a busy guy because you graduate Fordham, you get a BA in English literature, which played perfectly in what you would do with post-retirement, especially. But September of 85, you entered the State Police Academy and you graduated ultimately in March of the following year. You're having a good time in courts. You wanted the NYPD. You didn't get the NYPD, but you got something just as good. Tell me about that process.
Well, and in between all that, I married the love of my life.
You did, in June of 85. So that was a hell of a time.
Yeah, we'll be married 41 years this June.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So here's really what got me turned onto the state police. I was working at midnight at Rikers Island, and we're doing intake processing for, again, all the arrestees that are now committed. And they're talking about the different precincts and the different PDs. And they're talking about the different cops that arrested them. Oh, this cop from this precinct's cool. This cop's an idiot. The guys in this precinct are real tough. This precinct, they're lightweights, whatever. And then they're talking about other PDs, Nassau, whatever. And then they start talking about the troopers. And there was just like a whole different tone. They're like, those dudes don't mess around. Just some of the stuff they were saying was funny and stuff I'm not going to repeat on the air, but I was like, wow, I got to look into this unit, these people. And there were aspects of the state police I really liked. I liked the real strict military structure. I liked the discipline. I liked the accountability. There was a lot to the state police. So I'm like, okay, if they call me, I'll go. If NYPD calls me, I'll go. I was on both lists simultaneously. I was actually on 2 NYPD lists, and I was on the state police list.
Wow.
Odds were NYPD is going to call me, and I'm the type, that's a job I wanted, I probably would have retired out of there because I always wanted to work one of the Bronx precincts or work in Manhattan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And well, in a sense, you got to do that with the state police a little bit later on with the DA's office, which we'll get to. Like you and I were, or were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say, so then, September 30th, 1985, I started. One of your listeners is session 204. We were 158, so obviously I'm a bit older.
Yeah, a little bit further apart there by a few classes. Like we were talking about off air, police academies are generally very tough. The State Police Academy in New York is perhaps one of the toughest. And as you said, as you were telling me, a little context, and he can discuss it better than I can, and I'll lead him in with this. There was a listing done a while ago, you were telling me, ranking the top training facilities. At number 1 was the Los Angeles Police Department. At number 2, the New York State Police.
Yeah, well, they were the top 2. The FBI had done a study, and I don't have my hands on it, but I remember from years ago, and this is back in the 80s. But yeah, they lit the top 2 training they listed were LAPD and the New York State Police. Again, I'd read that somewhere, and then subsequently also heard it, but could I put my hands on that list right now? No.
I mean, again,
look, a lot of academies. There are plenty of great academies, training facilities out there, but every academy differs across the country because you have different standards for training police officers. But the New York State Police Academy, I went through in 85, graduated March 14th, 1986. It was 24 weeks then. The academy is now lengthened. I believe it's a 30-week academy. So God bless those who spend those extra few weeks, because we were ready to get out of there when week 24 came. But it was 6 months, and it was paramilitary training. And our BMO, which is a behavior modification officer, anybody who's been through the New York State Police Academy knows about the BMO. And I believe they still have that name for it. But our BMO was a former Army drill instructor. And we followed the Army manual for drill and everything else. And physically, it was a tough academy. Academically, it was a tough academy. Psychologically, emotionally, it was a tough academy. And I was there. My wife was pregnant with our oldest. My son just turned 40. And my wife, again, we were newlyweds and good Irish Catholic kids. She was pregnant shortly thereafter. But, leaving her. And then again, the situation with her being pregnant, that wasn't easy, but it was certainly something that steeled us, made us stronger for the 22 years that followed.
Of course. And Kurt adds, nothing has changed at the academy in that time. Everything is still the same, including the blankets on the bed.
Yeah, thank you, Kirk. It's good. It's good to know, and I know exactly what you're talking about with the blankets on the bed.
No, boy. Thanks to all you did, Kurt. Let me know if you want to come on the show, my friend. Seems like you got some stories too. So I'll ask, you were a Bronx kid. You worked in corrections still in the city. You were still in the city too, of course, when you were at courts. Going to Peekskill, not to say nothing happens in Peekskill, but was that a bit of a culture shock for you?
No, let me tell you this. I was surprised. So friends asked me, and I'd meet up with friends in Yonkers or out, bending the elbow somewhere in the Bronx. How's the job? Were you surprised? Yeah, I'm really surprised. My neighborhood in the Bronx had less crime than where I'm patrolling now as a trooper. The crack had just really hit the streets, and crack was everywhere. And Peekskill, wonderful city PD. And we patrolled the town around it, the town of Cortland and half of the town of Phillipstown. And the town of Cortland was busy, but invariably we get called in and we back up Peekskill a lot. And like any city PD, they were shorthanded. They were a great bunch of officers back there back in the day, and they had a great chief. But yeah, I was, a few months on the job and going to a drug-related shooting outside the housing projects. My first week, I'm wrestling around on the side of the road with 3 guys, with my senior man, my training officer, one of them a parolee, one heading upstate, out on bail pending his trial, and another with a lengthy criminal record, crack arrests, every way you turn. Crack was just all over the place. And there was an active, like you get with any kind of street scenario. They had prostitutes. The prostitutes would come over into the town. You're locking up them, the Johns. You would have domestics, weapons arrests. I mean, you name it. The Bureau's catching homicides, or then they're getting homicides at other stations that they're assisting with. So it was really an eye opener. I was like, wow, my Woodlawn neighborhood was a lot quieter than it is here. And if you were active and busy, you can make arrests. And I always said is that like kind of conveneer in some of these communities. I've learned that it looks like, oh, it's a nice quiet place to live, but really the cops know what's going on in those towns.
They're tuned in.
And some of them are not. I used to tell people like, oh, you're thinking of moving to that town? Maybe you might not want to. Maybe you want to look at the adjoining town. And they ask you why. And one story, when I was in uniform, this NYPD cop lived in our patrol area, and we recovered his briefcase that had his detective shield and his firearm in it. And it was stolen by a crackhead and his girlfriend. And we made the arrest. And the guy was like, Jesus, I thought I didn't have to lock my doors here. This is the safest place in the world, this and that. And I said to him, I said, do you know that you got like an active crack house not a quarter of a mile from you, right up probably where your wife goes shopping and everything else? And they got all sorts of stuff going on in there. And you got biker gangs that are over here. We made an arrest of a biker, like one of the leaders of the local drug crew and biker gang in this neighborhood, like a block away from where you live, about 3 months ago. And he was just like, as I would be too, because you're working in the city, you're in the Bronx, and he was a Bronx detective, and he had no idea. And we were lucky that we got them. It was on a car stop, and kind of pulled into the area. They were going into the cottages, we called it. And his firearm and his shield, which I don't know what they were doing in an unlocked car and a briefcase to begin with, but I think we saved him a lot of days and a lot of aggravation.
Absolutely. And let me ask you, once you cleared up off training, when you got out of the academy, were you guys generally on patrol a one-man car, or was it always a two-man car?
So you rode with your, they call him senior man back in the day, your senior trooper now. Well, now it's a field training officer. They switched to field training officers when I was in uniform, and I was an FDO for a few years before I went into the Bureau. And then, you got released, and you were riding the one-man patrol car. You teamed up from midnight to 5 a.m. You rode doubles. And depending where you worked, peak skill, you would have backup. Some areas you would have backup, you'd have to wait. But depending where you were, you could have backup pretty quick. I worked another station where you might have to wait a half hour for backup. Ooh. So they have a motto in the academy: one riot, one trooper. So you're kind of really taught a lot of self-sufficiency, and which some of the barracks upstate that they patrol huge areas up by the Canadian border. And I mean,
God bless
good luck. They don't rely on backup.
Yeah,
so
they are their backup.
They are their backup. Yeah. So, and rural policing, not that I ever did rural policing, it was more urban, suburban, but rural policing's got its own set of challenges that are unique and have quite the elements of a heightened danger to them too, depending upon where you're working.
I can imagine. So in between all this, you started law school at Pace University in August of '87, because God forbid you ever take it easy. You're doing multiple things at once. But a year after that started, you got transferred over to Somers. So was it any different from Peekskill, or was it more of the same?
It was a totally different station, and the Somers barracks I had a sergeant who liked me, and he said, "Hey, come on over if you want to come." And I decided to go over there. A little bit of a different change. There's a couple of my academy classmates. A good friend of mine was over there. It was a different station. not as much of the urban element did you get there.
Right.
But I was as busy, if not busier. Made a lot of felony arrests there. And Somers is always, even when I was in major crimes, Somers is a place that always got these weird homicides, or these homicides like you see on Dateline and stuff like that. But yeah, I went over there. I did 2 years in the one barracks, which was great. I did 2 years over there. And then I made the bureau. I made the bureau pretty quickly. I made it with 4 years on the road. Going to law school, we had something in our contract back in the day where it was negotiated by the union. You would get tuition reimbursement. So the state police paid 55% of my law school.
Wow.
And nobody was using this benefit back then. Not a lot of people. They've since changed it. You wouldn't get as much as I got back then, but also law school is a lot less expensive than it is now. I tell my students, because law school now is just ridiculous, but I went to 4 years at night of law school, and it cost anywhere between $22,000 and $23,000, which is almost what a full first year will cost now, maybe closer to $25,000 to $30,000, depending where you're going.
Mm-hmm. And let me ask you, because of, and again, I don't know if it was just your interest alone, I'm sure it was part of it, but was part of going into law school because of your father's path and wanting to kind of, emulate dad?
No, I mean, in hindsight, yes, but I always, butted heads with him. I didn't want to go to law school. My dream was to get my master's of fine arts from Columbia University or go to Columbia School of Journalism and then work for a few years while I write the great American novel and then, become a well-known novelist. Well, that didn't work out. As I always kid, I said I fell in with a bad crowd. I became a cop. I fell in with an even worse crowd when I became a lawyer. But I looked at it as it would give me an advantage and a leg up for promotion. And then I realized I didn't want to be promoted. I didn't want to be a sergeant. I didn't want to be a lieutenant. An investigator has the equivalent rank in the state police structure as a sergeant. So you're in control of the scene when you get there and everything else. But I didn't want to be a lieutenant. I didn't want to be a captain. I had more fun and more fulfillment being an investigator in the bureau, where I was for 17 and a half years. And then when I got into law school, I realized, I can parlay this degree into other things. That's when I got into teaching. And then I started my side hustle before side hustles were a thing. Mm-hmm. And my side hustle was I had a law practice.
Oh, there you go. And we'll get into you graduating in the summer of 91. But in between all this, March of 90, you do get that investigator promotion and you end up going into the bureau. SIU is definitely above reproach. Its reputation is second to none. Being there during that time, you talked about, we'll get into, of course, some of the investigations momentarily. You talked earlier about getting out into the field and your senior man back then, the equivalent of an FTO today, mentoring you. Who were the senior investigators back then that really showed you the ropes, both directly and indirectly?
Well, we had a great guy at Peekskill, George Johansson. He was a senior investigator. The guy's a legend. Wonderful, wonderful guy. And all of the his subordinates there, all the investigators, they were just fantastic. And then I had a great senior investigator when I went into labor racketeering, Danny Weiss, and he'd been an investigator when I was at Peekskill. And then there was a great crew at Somers as well. And, you pick something up from, and my senior man was incredible, Bart Johnson. You pick up something from each individual that you work with, the good ones. And my senior man told me early on, look at the good troopers, the ones you want to be like, and emulate them, right? So do look and see what they're doing right, and then just kind of follow that model. And that's what I tried to align myself to do. There were plenty of great examples for me to look at and follow. And there were also bad examples of stay away.
Yeah.
Stay away.
Here's what not to do.
Here's what not to do. Exactly.
Right. Plenty of that to go around in any profession, and unfortunately in professions like this one too.
Different. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I often say this with friends of mine, everybody's an example. It's just a matter of if they're either a negative example or a positive example. But they're an example. They're
good carpenters, they're bad carpenters, they're good butchers, they're bad butchers, lawyers, whatever. Mm-hmm. It's like you said, any profession.
Exactly. Around this time, the mafia, although not necessarily at the peak of their powers, in the 70s and 80s are still very prominent. I mean, the commission trials that was spearheaded by some guy, I don't know whatever became of him, named Rudy Giuliani, really helped bring down a lot of the mob bosses back then, and a lot of the families too. But Gotti's still going strong. A lot of these families are still relatively going strong. Their main industry was construction. If you wanted to get anything built during that era, particularly in Manhattan, you had to go through the mob. So especially back then with racketeering being what it is and RICO really taking shape during that era, tell me about those investigations and finding the bad money and with it, the bad people doing the bad things.
Yeah, so I first went to the Construction Industry Strike Force in Queens and in Whitestone, and we worked alongside OCCB, NYPD's Organized Crime Control Bureau. They were in the same building as us, doing different cases, but every now and then they kind of cross over. Mm-hmm. And my senior investigator was an old timer. He forgot more about organized crime history and arrests and everything else than I would ever know. And that was, again, it was a learning curve. It's something new. You're plain clothes now. You're out of the short hair all the time and shave every day, and it's a different kind of work. Gotti was ruling the city back then in the Gambino crime family. The smarter ones were the Genovese and Vito Genovese and the I'm the crazy man routine that he was pulling.
The Vince the Chin Gigante.
The Chin, yep. And Vince and the Chin. So it was still a lot going on in the early 90s. People were saying they were dead. They weren't dead. They were still very much in their heyday, and it was just a different type of rackets that were going on. And they were getting into newer rackets. I mean, they were getting into financial frauds. They had the oil scam out of Queens, and they were also getting along with other groups, Russian organized crime, Greek organized crime, biker gangs. So there was a lot of stuff going on back then. And I was only in the I was only in the Construction Industry Strike Force for maybe 3 to 4 months before I get yanked to go down to the labor racketeering unit out of Manhattan for an investigation. So, but again, in those first 3 or 4 months, learned a lot, worked the Bronx, Brooklyn, Manhattan, mostly up in Spanish Harlem and lower Westchester, and did a couple of different cases. Didn't by that point didn't do anything yet where made any arrests. My first arrest as an investigator until I went to labor racketeering.
And we'll get to that investigation in a moment that kind of took shape in the summer of 90. But just get into the Manhattan's DA's office at that time, and I'm not sure how often you dealt with him. This was Morgenthau's DA's office, and he held it down for a very long time. For those of you who are fans of the original Law and Order, the character of Adam Schiff, portrayed brilliantly by the late, great Stephen Hill, is based in large part off District Attorney Morgenthau, who ran the office well into his 70s or 80s, maybe even a little bit longer than that.
80s, yeah.
Yeah. So back then, coming into Manhattan's Manhattan, but back then under his direction, that office his reputation was up here. For a young guy like you, granted, you had a little bit of experience under your belt. You were very streetwise by this point. I'll get to the investigation in a second. How cool was that as someone who's truly a student, not only of law enforcement, but obviously too, given what you were doing on the side, law?
So freaking cool. So freaking cool. I used to say we're chasing ghosts down here because we had one case with the Plasterers Union when I was in the Construction Industry Strike Force. And I had read a book called The Mob by a former FBI agent called Ed Romer. It's like a classic. And he's talking about the Plasterers Union and this whole investigation into organized crime in New York City and everything else. The only thing is it was in the 1900s. It took place, 19th century, I should say. It took place in the 1800s. So here we are in the 1990s and we're looking into the Plasterers Union. It was just kind of like we're chasing ghosts. It's just, regenerating that kind of, and if any, you study organized crime, the ethnic trends in organized crime, right? The Italian organized crime, the Irish organized crime, the Irish mafia. And every ethnic group has its elements, right? And it's the story of, look, we're a country of immigrants. We're this big melting pot, and people got pushed into the cities. And there's a brilliant book by Luc Sante about the Lower East Side and organized crime. But then there's another one that the filmmaker made. I'm drawing a blank on the book, Gangs in New York.
Yes, Martin
York.
Scorsese later made a film on
and that was
it.
based on a Herbert Asbury book written in the 1930s. But that was a brilliant book too, and I had read that book to get an understanding of organized crime and how it kind of came up out of that big immigration push in the United States, and the different kinds of gangs, and the very nativist gangs, America for America only, the immigrant gangs, and that morphed into some, the five families in a way, as did the post effects of Prohibition.
Right.
So I was always a student of it, and working in that milieu in the 90s, being in Manhattan, it was fantastic.
Oh, it was top notch. And then besides the mafia, you still had the Westies running around as well, doing what
I dealt with the Westies. Dealt with one of the Westies who was an informant, and actually mentioned in one of the better known books written about the Westies. I'll never forget that story. But that's a different story. But yeah, the Westies were still running around, and like I said, Gotti was it in the city. The hit was done on Paul Castellano while I was still in uniform. By the time I got promoted, Gotti was rocking and rolling and bit over the top, according to some old line mobsters, but
just a bit.
Yeah, that was the scene back in the early 90s. And then you had the Colombo War. You had
91.
The internecine war between the Colombo crime family, and bodies were popping up all over. I remember doing a surveillance in the Bronx. We were in the Mosholu area, and they found drawing a blank on the mobster's name, but he was stuffed in a trunk in an area we probably passed by half a dozen times working a case. There was a lot of missing persons, Colombos and maid soldiers and associates back then, and then there were hits going on all over the city. So you were working in that kind of environment. We had undercovers doing different ops. We had informants doing different things. So, and again, you had that New York City with that 2,200 a year homicide rate.
Mm-hmm. And a drug problem too, because like you said, crack
and the drug problem, and you're bouncing around different neighborhoods. You're in, you could be in a Little Italy in Manhattan, or you could be in Ozone Park in Queens, but then you could be in East New York. Or you could be down in the South Bronx, and you never know where something is going to lead you, or what door you're knocking on in connection with that case. And then also you get called into other things as well.
Right. And just a quick aside on the Westies, again, to go back to Law and Order, there's a great episode from season 1 that talks about the Troubles, because it kind of plays into, I believe, an IRA terrorist. And the character portrayed by George Zunza, Sergeant Max Previous, talking to Chris Nulls, as Detective Mike Logan. And he's like, the Westies, they'll do the sign of the cross while they slit your throat, and that's essentially, he summed them up pretty well.
It's a great line. Yeah, it's absolutely a great line. And I tell you, Law and Order pulled stuff from the headlines. And we had 2 cases that became Law and Order episodes.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that off air, because I'm a massive super, especially during the Jerry Orbach years. That's my favorite era of the program. Now, we'll get into the investigation that brought you there originally, before, of course, going into labor racketeering in 91. Compromised undercover operation, always a dangerous thing because lives are at stake. And more disappointingly, not that this can't happen, unfortunately, like we talked about earlier, bad butchers, bad carpenters, it's no different in policing. A leak coming in from within your own agency. It's disheartening. It's infuriating, because people can get killed and lives can be ruined. Tell me about the discovery process and closing this out in a way that brought everybody to full accountability.
Well, I was working the construction industry strike force. And I get a call one day, and I talk about it in the book. I get a call one day to go down to Manhattan office, and I go down to Lower Manhattan, and it's the labor racketeering unit, and I'm told about. There was an undercover. We had a state police undercover in the Javits Center, and we had a state police informant, and they were burned like right off the bat within 2 weeks of being down there. And so the undercover absolutely, gets pulled right away, and the informant gets cover story, and he gets pulled. So I get called in, and I'm basically given, the senior investigator tells me, you're here because this is your case to investigate. And I'm like, why me? I got 4 months in the bureau. I'm coming up my 5 years on the job. What do I know? And the guy running the unit at the time said, look, I remember you when you were in uniform, you were a straight up trooper, and you had no allegiances to anybody on the job. So, okay. And plus, he was the plus. They didn't give me the people I wanted. He wanted,
well,
and he was being truthful, and I appreciated it because it answered, okay, why me? He went down a list of 3 people. This guy who was a well-known profiler, lieutenant, great cop, legendary on the state police. No, you can't have him. He's committed to Albany. Okay, well, give me my old partner, right? Another well-regarded guy from Troop K. No, you can't have him. Well, give me this guy. Yeah, no, you can't have him. You can have anybody within SIU. So obviously you couldn't have anybody in his unit because they were suspect, which they were not. That was cleared up real quick. So dopey me gets pulled. the young investigator with barely coming on 4 months as an investigator and 5 years on the job, less than 5 years, and I get sent down there. And there was a suspect. It was a disgraced former inspector from our job who did federal time. He had been a major in New York City, and that was the starting point. But my supervisor said it had to come from Albany because there's only a finite group of people who know. So I basically spun my wheels for a while, cleared out, nobody in the unit real quick. None of them are doing it or involved. And I was told this real early. Only me, you, another investigator who was helping me a little bit on the side, but eventually wasn't told everything. The superintendent and the first deputy superintendent know what's going on. And you can't talk to anybody about this, not even your wife. I'm like, well, who's she going to tell? But all right, sworn to secrecy, whatever. So I spent 10 months, and as I would come to find out, is that I ended up tracing phone calls, and it really started with doing some surveillance. I'll never forget, it was before Christmas, and I found a payphone back in the day when I had payphones inside a business. When I did all the dumps on the phones, I found 3 very damning calls. 2, and they were all routed through our suspect, a disgraced former inspector on the New York State Police, an organized crime made member in the Genovese crime family who was in charge of the Javits Center at the time, running all the rackets there. A guy by the name of Ralph Coppola, who's now been a missing person for years, suspected of having been killed by the Genoveses. And actually, he's a missing person case out of our Somers barracks at file 6.
Ironically enough.
Yeah. And oddly enough, and I actually helped an investigator many years ago who had caught that case and as a cold case. And I ended up tracing those 3 calls, relay of calls, to our Albany headquarters, to our internal affairs unit. Wow. And there was a major suspect of who I had my very firm belief in who it was. I got called up to Albany, as you can imagine, for 2 command performances. One day they called down to Manhattan and they tell my boss, have Dwyer up here in 2 hours. It takes 2 hours some days just to get out of Manhattan. I'm going to go up from Manhattan to Albany. And then the following week I was called up there. And first of all, the first time I was called up there was to explain to them the whole case. And here's the funny thing. I caught the case for a few months. Then inspection in our internal affairs said, give it to us. Then after a month, they wiped their hands of it. I remember talking to the inspector up there, and he's like, I can't figure this out. Here. So I got it back in my lap. And it's a bizarre world. And then I got called up there to explain the case to them after I uncovered all this stuff. And then I had another command performance up there, like within the week. And I'm before the head of our inspections unit and one of the top colonels up there who used to be our troop commander. And it was not going well in the sense that they were giving me all the excuses of how it could never be anybody up in Albany because they're all commissioned officers and nobody would do that, despite the evidence of the calls going there. And I got this very ominous question from the colonel. How's law school going? Do you think you'll finish?
Wow.
I'm like, yeah, you bet your ass I'm going to finish. I didn't spend 3.5 years. And I'm thinking to myself, and people like you are not going to stop me from it. But so my first, the first grand jury I testified as an investigator, the first time any arrests are credited to me as an investigator ends up being this disgraced NYSP inspector and a working senior investigator in the New York State Police assigned to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, who we did a search warrant at his house based upon probable cause. And I was kept out of there by the inspector from our internal affairs who came down there. And we had another boss. We had two seniors running the unit at the time. And this guy, Ronnie Clark, great guy. He was in charge of that search warrant, and he was really pissed that myself and another investigator were kept out, but especially me, who worked the case for 10 months. I'm the one that knew everything. I knew what to look for. He finally went in and he had a talk with the inspector and basically said, "Bring me up on charges. They're coming in." So we got the wave in to go in, and we weren't in there 10 minutes, and we were finding incriminating lists of protected witnesses, informants. The DA that was handling this case out of the Manhattan DA's office, one of his witnesses was on that list. Jeez. And also was the contact information for a guy by the name of Billy Peist, who was an NYPD detective who was subsequently arrested. I think he was arrested, but big news stories back in the day. He had lost one leg in some accident that kept him on the job. He was in their intel unit, but he had been selling information to the mafia. And we had a connection between our guy and him. So they both got arrested. The senior investigator retired like the next day, moved to Florida where he had another house. And then he was going to come up and cooperate with the Manhattan DA's office. But en route, him and his wife stopped in South Carolina, and his wife woke up to find him in bed bleeding. He tried to kill himself. He tried to cut his wrists. So he went in for psych eval for whatever time. And then by the time he got out of there, he basically told them to pound salt, and he was taking it to trial. He ended up taking a plea. He took a plea. The other guy, the disgraced inspector from our internal affairs unit, took it to a full boat trial. And he had a very well-known attorney who represented organized crime figures. And I was sitting in the trial watching it, and during a break, the defendant comes back. He sees me. He gives me a wink, and he goes, "So what do you think, kid?" And because he knew who I was at that point. And I said, "I think the prosecution's got a pretty strong case." And he says to me, he goes, "We'll see. I'm confident in my guy." Walks out of there. 2 days later, the jury acquits him.
Wow.
Jury acquits him. But here's the thing. We had an informant that was in the Javits Center. He was really bad on the stand. He was shaky. He was a cokehead. He got rearrested for an armed robbery out in Long Island. The guy was a mess. He was a hot mess. But also, he was a little bit sketchy on the stand. Turns out he had gotten a call. His mother had gotten a call at her apartment where he was staying by some person. And we really don't know the substance of that call. But I had done phone dumps on this guy's attorney's office, the guy that got acquitted, and the call was made from his secretary's phone. So I think it was our former internal affairs inspector that made the call and got this guy jittery. But yeah, he got acquitted, So I was 1 for 1. I was 1 for 1 as a new investigator, and that stays with you. That stays with you throughout your career, because there'd be other things I'd encounter later in my career, especially towards the end, corruption related. But I was telling somebody that story, and they're like, "Wow, The Departed owes you some royalties."
I was thinking that.
I never thought of that. Put two
because it's just like The Departed. Yeah, I was thinking that the whole time.
It's a scenario, and that's it's mine happened way before the movie came out. So but yeah, I had toll records. I did months of surveillance of other cops, which I hated. Pulling toll records, phone records, doing all sorts of interviews and stuff. And then when I kind of latched on, I'm like, oh. But here's the funny thing: how I found the phone. Sometimes they say it's better to be lucky than good. Right. Though somebody said to me, "Well, you're hunting down the right area." There was an address in the Bronx that came up, and it was in a particular area of the Bronx where I'd done some surveillance when I was in the construction industry strike force. And one day, me and my partner, we were looking at Ralph Coppola, who's a soldier in the Genovese crime family, and was running rackets at the Javits Center. This is before I even knew anything about this leak case. We made one too many turns around the block. Coppola's outside washing his car. He's just in jeans, no shirt on, and the guy was a weightlifter. The guy was huge, and no shoes on. Sees us at second turn. And my partner was a black investigator. You see a black guy and a white guy in a car in the Bronx, kind of, all right, what do you think this is? And so he starts chasing us, right? He's running after us, throwing sponges at us. So we get out of Dodge. Months later, I would see this address on the phone tolls and those 3 calls, and they kept gnawing at me until finally the light bulb went off. And I'm like, that's the address where this Genovese soldier lives. It's his sister's house. It came back to a different name on the toll records. And then I looked at the name and I'm like, oh, that's so-and-so's sister. He lives in the downstairs apartment of the sister's house. That's where the calls were. That's where the calls were going to the sister's house. So yeah, we have 3 calls, 2 before we found out about our guys being burned, and then 1 right after.
And that's literally, like I said, The Departed. I've seen that movie quite a number of times. And
Great
I was
movie.
thinking, a great movie. And I was thinking in my head, this sounds just, before you said it, you read my mind, it seems, because it sounds just like it. Minus the scene in the elevator, and the movie's 20 years old, so no spoilers, where everyone except for Matt Damon's character gets shot, except, Mark Wahlberg gets him at the end.
Yeah, that's a great scene.
It is a great scene.
Yeah, and it just colors your perception of the job. And there was a saying back in my day on the state police, the job is Frank Adam King Edward. The job is fake.
Yeah.
And there's an element to it where you're like, well, how much is on the up and up? I mean, there's 99.9% of state police are true and do their job the right way, but it just takes that one. It only takes one bad apple. And I go back to, and you just want to set the scene for back in the 90s too. Mm-hmm. Don't forget Ippolito and Caracappa were the mafia cops that were doing the hits. I remember that Bell Parkway shooting. We were doing a lot of work out in Bell Parkway today. I remember that hit when that happened. Everything else, I'm like, oh, geez, we were out in that area, last week. So you have these 2 guys who, NYPD Detective Gold Shields, and they're doing hits for the Lucchese's.
And major case guys too. Let's not forget they were in the major case squad.
Well, Joe Coffey, who's a legendary cop in NYPD, did the Son of Sam, the Omega Task Force. And I had the pleasure of, bumping elbows with him in the Organized Crime Task Force as a young investigator. Coffey was running that major crime unit, and he's on record, and I've read a few articles that saying he never wanted Caracappa in that unit. So, but, sometimes these guys kind of squirm in.
Yeah. Joe Coffey left us back in 2015. He was 77. I think he died of cancer. That's a guy, geez, I would have loved to have interviewed him. The stories that man had. Oh, God.
Let me tell you, I just loved watching that guy walk down the hall in the OCC headquarters in White Plains. That guy just carried himself a certain way. He was a good cop. A lot of people said, well, Coffey was all about coffee, and coffee went Hollywood and everything else. Let me tell you, you have Joe Coffey's resume. You earned it. I once sat between a conversation of Donnie Brasco, Joe Pistone, the FBI agent,
friend of mine. Yes.
Yeah, and Jurgensen, Randy Jurgensen, NYPD, and it was at a book signing in New Paltz, and Randy Jurgensen's book came out years ago, and I introduced myself to Pistone because one of the cases I worked, the Bonanno crime family, we arrested some of the targets he had in his case, but they didn't get. So we shared a few laughs over some common people. And I was very fortunate to get a blurb from Joe Pistone for my new book. It's on the back cover because the new book that I'm writing about a 50-year-old missing person and murder mystery is a true case. I'm working with a retired Secret Service agent who happens to be Pistone's brother-in-law. So,
yeah, Pistone. I've had the good fortune. Joe and I got connected through our mutual friend Bob Starkman, who was a customs agent down in Florida, and Joe's been on this program a couple of times. And what a treat, right? What an absolute legend.
Great guy, so gracious. When I met him, just introduced myself. We had a quick talk, quick laugh. I asked this guy that I'm interviewing for the new book. I said, "Hey, say no if you want to say no, but would Joe?" not a problem. Joe got back. He read the advanced reader copy, some really nice words. He put in the email to my friend, his brother-in-law, and then so I have his blurb on the back of the book. But those were the days that was the Caracappa and Ippolito were running around and all this was going on. But Joe Coffey, legendary guy. Like again, sitting in between Jurgensen and Pistone, listening to their stories, you're like, wow.
Yeah,
wow.
Absolutely. To be a fly on the wall. Talk about how much fun that was.
Yeah,
how much fun that was. Man, we're hitting a lot of information here. I could talk to you all night. We got more stuff to cover here. And that being said, we still haven't even hit your book yet, which we're definitely going to talk about for sure. It's interesting because we're seeing that shift in the 90s, right? Where not that your work was necessarily impeded, but crime was high, like we said. And then, that same guy that had the commission trial going on and helped bring down a lot of those mob bosses, he ends up becoming mayor of New York City. And he's hell bent on law and order. And the police commissioner he brought in was more of the same philosophy, of course, referring to Giuliani and Bill Bratton. So that seemingly affected everybody in a positive way because cops were being encouraged. And it was tough after these corruption scandals. Everybody was apprehensive. Giuliani and Bratton came in respectively, and they both deserve credit, even though they both couldn't stand each other, ironically, and saying, hey, listen, no pun intended, handcuffs come off, you're cops. Go out there, do your job. Don't let those idiots define you. That's on them. It's not on you. In terms of the investigative work, it felt like you guys were unleashed. So seeing that shift from when the decade started in 90 to 94, 95 forward on a state level, certainly with Pataki, who was more of the same philosophy too, how did that change things?
Well, I was out of the city October 95, so I went back up to Troop K and I was working out in the back rooms. And I mean, didn't affect us, but everybody talks about Bratton. Everybody forgets about Ray Kelly.
Right, the first time, yes.
And I think Ray Kelly is quoted as saying, whoever gets the homicide rate under 300 in New York City, they should throw him a ticker tape parade. And I think 1 year when it was 298, Ray Kelly was the commissioner, so they owe him a ticker tape parade. I mean, when Pataki became governor, what I did see is I saw legislation that was more pro-police in the sense of assisting, giving the police what was needed. We had the Clinton White House, and just whatever somebody's politics might be aside, he was a Democrat, but he was more of a right-leaning Democrat, at least towards law and order. A lot of money, a lot of funding went into all those police packages and all those big hiring waves. So you had that, crack. We've gone through the crack crisis. Drugs were still prominent. You had black tar heroin coming out, and there was just this legislation like, let's kind of like in the city, be cops, do your job, and whatnot. And I felt the New York State Police, you were always, whether you're a trooper, whether you're an investigator, you were always allowed to do your job. The state police is a very proactive agency. I believe they train you to be proactive, not sit and wait for the calls. Go out and hunt. You're in uniform. You work in a complaint station or you work in a highway station. Go out and hunt for those drugs. Go out and hunt for those guns. Get them before they do damage in the community. And that was what I felt the better troopers were doing, and certainly the investigators. You're catching your cases, you're solving your burglaries, your robberies, your whatever, and when you're catching a homicide or something. But you're allowed to do your work and do your job, and the senior investigators were allowed to do their thing. There's a point where it did start to become micromanagement, and I did start to see that shift. It was really, I felt my generation, like the people came on the job in my day, were micromanaging. The old time bosses would let you kind of run. They've been around, and I did 17 and a half years in the Bureau. So I saw a lot of shifts, pre 9/11, post 9/11, but even pre 9/11, just as this sense of micromanagement now, like they're on top of you and they're questioning everything you did. I once got into it with one of my lieutenants over a legal issue. And I flat out told him, I go, Lou, I'm the last guy on the face of the earth you should be arguing law with. And I basically said to him, I'm admitted in 2 states and I practice on the side. I'm not going to have this conversation. And because he was wrong. He was blatantly wrong. And I don't care. You read it in the book? Wonderful. Fantastic. I went through several years of law school and practice and everything else. So, and I had all the investigative experience. He was never in the Bureau. So you're not going to tell me how to run a case or what
you got a leg up in that regard.
What what the law is. Why are you micromanaging? The good bosses would let their people do their job. right? Do their job. And the good bosses know when to step back, know when to put trust in their people, right? And I had many a great boss. I was blessed with many a great supervisor.
And just to use a sports analogy, because I'm going to rewind to you passing law school because we glossed over that. I want to go back to that. I shouldn't have glossed over it. I cite Phil Jackson. I didn't grow up a Bulls fan or a Lakers fan. I'm a diehard Knicks fan. But Phil Jackson, I remember one time the story was told, I think Shaquille O'Neal told it, Game 7, 2000 Western Conference Finals. They're playing the Portland Trailblazers. Portland's just giving it to them. That was a great team. They had Scottie Pippen, post MJ on it, and they're up by 15 the fourth quarter. Phil Jackson calls a timeout. He doesn't yell, doesn't scream. This is a guy that already won 6 titles with Michael and Scotty and the Bulls. Just looks at the guys and says, hey, it's up to you. Sits back, guys go back. Nothing. No game plan, no pep talk. It's up to you. Sits back on the bench. Lakers came back and won that game. Why? He trusted his guys. Yeah. And Kobe and Shaq went out there and the rest of them too and, orchestrated an amazing comeback. They ended up winning their first championship together. So June of 91 is when you graduate. And then right after that, back to back, you said you're admitted in 2 states, Connecticut in December of 91, a couple months later in 92, New York. How did the Connecticut part, though? How did that happen?
So like a glutton for punishment, you take the multi-state the first day. All day you're taking the multi-state bar exam. Then you take New York. And New York is the most comprehensive of any of the bar exams. It tests on the most substantive areas of law. And then like a fool, me and my buddy, who was an NYPD lieutenant at the time, we decided to go to Connecticut and another guy and take the Connecticut bar. The reason being a couple of things. Connecticut, the way it worked, you would get your results from Connecticut first. So odds were if you did well in Connecticut and you passed the bar, you passed New York. And also you get your multi-state scores first. So when I got my multi-state scores, I was like, okay, this is good. Odds are pretty good. I'm going to be admitted first try in New York. But I'd taken Connecticut on that third day. So when I got my Connecticut notice, I'm like, all right, this is gold. I knew in early October I should have passed New York. When I finally got my bar results in New York in November, a month later, 5 weeks later, I was ecstatic because one, I could not pass the bar in the first round because my dad passed it the first time. So I'd never hear the end of it. So I passed it and I was still in the city at the time and my boss let me take off for the day. And I took a train shuttle over to Brooklyn, went to the courthouse, raised my right hand, got admitted. We had 2 young kids at the time, my older 2, our youngest wasn't around yet. And my wife was home with them, but it was nice because her and the older 2 were able to be in Connecticut, Norwalk when I got sworn in there. It was a freezing cold December day. And me and my buddy, the NYPD lieutenant, got sworn in Connecticut the first day, our first time there. So that was more just strategic to take Connecticut. And I did do a little bit of practice in Connecticut over the years, but it was more of a strategic decision.
What did you specialize in primarily?
When I was on the job, I did a lot of transactional stuff. So I did a lot of real estate. I did a lot of wills, trusts, and estates, estate planning. I did some small claims things. I did some things here and there. Then I started getting some union stuff. I had a buddy that was starting a union, getting involved in union work. And then when I left the job, I was doing a lot of union stuff. And then I morphed into representing 2 unions. At one point in time, I represented 1,100 law enforcement in New York, and I had steady retainers from 2 unions. I was getting a lot of disciplinary cases, a lot of grievances, some arbitrations. And then I developed a specialty where I started having female officers come to me for complaints about sexual harassment, gender discrimination, and sexual assault by their male colleagues. So I handled a number of those cases and also represented some officers in male officers in discrimination cases. But what I did a lot, my bread and butter, and what I loved doing the disciplinary cases. I love representing cops that were being accused of doing, and usually with the union, I had to represent everybody, right? But when somebody was coming to privately retain me, I could pick and choose. So somebody's coming to me and obviously it's just a bad case. I'm not going to take it. I'm not going to, support your malfeasance. But what I would get in the cases I would take are the cops that were getting screwed over. And I had a couple against my old job, that people that I represented, and I knew the nature of the beast, and I just don't like unfairness or injustice. And if you're a good cop and because you're not one of the fair-haired children, or they're covering for somebody else, or for whatever reason, and it happens. I was there, so I was picking up those kinds of cases, and those are the ones I really love.
And good on you for that. And you could do your homework and know what case is legit and what cases not. You had enough experience under your belt. So if somebody deserved to face the music, and that's the thing now, like, again, and the social media has made this such a diluted conversation, which is a different story for a different day. You get out in real life, it's simple in the police force and really any sort of facet of first response. If someone has to face the music and it's proven beyond a reasonable doubt, yeah, you did that. The only question is, in accordance with guidelines, let's make sure this person's disciplined fairly. But you're going to get disciplined, and you deserve to. But the other aspect to it too is, like you said, there are some people. It's like, what? No, this is wrong, and they don't deserve to be punished at all. Yeah.
Yeah, I look, my job, if I knew I had some, when I was representing, unions, and I had to take, every case, to give them a soft landing, to give them as soft and as fair landing as I could give them, and really help them maintain their job, not lose that job. Now, there are some that cross the Rubicon. There was no going back. Right. I had one female officer, police officer, and they were looking to bag her. New York City DOI was looking to arrest her for grand larceny, felony. And I said, look, I convinced them to just let her resign and go quietly, not arrest her. And she went. She was good with that. She was good. She could go and just leave the job. And it's like, right, better than having a criminal record, and go get something else. So, I was there to soften the blow in those cases where it's just like, I don't know, like you effed up. There's nothing I can do here.
Exactly. Like,
right?
you should have known better.
Soften the landing for you.
Right. I will ask you. I like to ask these questions in a sophisticated way, but I don't know how else to ask it. Being a New York State trooper and an investigator at that, having a law practice, how the hell did you juggle that?
And you know what? All my kids were runners, and all my kids ran Division I. My two girls were Division I scholarship athletes. My son was an full academic ride, but he ended up running at Seton Hall as well as a walk-on. I never missed a meet. I was always there. I made family a priority. So it's time management. It's being able to juggle. And I had an incredible wife. I mean, she held the fort down when I wasn't there, when I was running around the city, when I was, and that's what the book, the book is really, people ask me, what's the book? And I say, well, the book is part true crime narrative. It's part memoir, and it's part love story. And my wife is the heroine of the book. And in so many police families or law enforcement or first responder families, it's that significant other. It's that spouse who's there to support you. And in whatever the endeavor is. But you look at police families, you look at military families, first responder families, there's always somebody, not always, but there's usually somebody there, left behind when you're out doing the work, doing the job. And my wife is incredible. And then she, talking about overachievers, she had her bachelor's in science from Fordham. We met at Fordham. She went and then got a nursing degree. So she went and got her RN license once my youngest was in school full time. So she was balancing that, and she was also holding down my law practice when I was at work.
Jeez, God bless her. God bless her. I mean, my God, that's incredible. And even then, 95, another move in your career. You'd been in the city for quite a bit, and this is not a knock on the assignment that came later. You're bringing a lot of experience to it by this point, because by this point you got a decade or close to a decade on the job. But 95, you leave the city and you go over between Peekskill and Wappinger. You're not going back there to patrol. You're going back there as an investigator.
Yeah, backroom investigator. Yeah.
You talked earlier about how sometimes people may look at these upstate communities and think, how bad could it be compared to the city? But like we talked about earlier with Peekskill, don't get it twisted. Same thing with Wappinger.
Yeah, I mean, it was a different area. It was a busy station. So it's a busy station in Troop K. We had, I worked homicides there. I worked, we had 3 prisons we covered, and we'd have crimes in there. We'd have suicides in there. We'd have, all sorts of different death investigations in there. We had our robberies. We're near the interstates. We had our domestics. So it was a busy station, and I wanted to get closer to home. The city was wearing on me. My kids were getting older, and I wanted to be closer to home. So, I kind of moved my way up the line there. And then I got to a point when I was at Wappingers, I was only 6 miles from where I lived. And my law office, when I eventually opened my law office in 2002 with my college buddy, it was only a mile from the barracks. So I had a law partner, a guy I went to high school and college with, and actually worked in the courts with. And so barracks is only 6 miles from the house. Law practice is only a mile from the barracks. And it was busy, but we made everything. You know, you saw one of us. I say you saw one Dwyer, you saw all 5 of us. So I made it to the kids' things, and I had a great supervisor. I had a female supervisor, Joanne Leone, who was absolutely fantastic. I worked for her. I followed her to major crimes, and we had a good group. We had a great core, a lot of fun, and a good group of people.
Absolutely. And again, you're, like I said, you're coming back to it with a heck of a lot more experience than when you originally got there as a young patrol officer, or patrol trooper, I should say, in the mid 80s. You know, long-term investigative work, and I like talking about this with guys and gals who were in the Bureau, rather it be on your side or rather it be on the local law enforcement side. Patience, right? It's tough because you're seeing these individuals actively do, in some cases, some really, really heinous stuff. And you know they're guilty of sin, and you know you have them, but you have to build that case. And sometimes that gets tough when you know you just want to bring them down, considering how much damage they're doing to the community. When it came to building a case, every investigator is different. And when it came to that patience, what was your personal strategy with that?
You know, I had the experience from New York City. So I had worked enterprise corruption cases, which is the New York's version of the RICO statute.
Yeah.
And I know it's like a slow burn, right? It's a slow burn. As one, I remember a lieutenant who I used to work with when I was in uniform, and he became lieutenant in SIU. And I was coming up from the city one day to drop off relays in White Plains, and I said, "Hey, how do you like it?" He goes, "Wow, it's so different. You know, we're used to being on the outside looking in. Here in SIU, you're on the inside looking out. You know, you're in. You got informants and everything else. So it's a different type of investigation. But yeah." The last big case before the quintuple homicide that I worked, a gang investigation with the Safe Streets Task Force and my FBI partner, you know, that was a pretty violent gang, and they were responsible for a main homicide. We're investigating a couple of others, lots of shootings and victims, and they were just wilding through this municipality in the Hudson Valley, and it was and they had a lot of guns, they had a lot of firepower, and they were stick-up artists as well. You know, they robbed other drug crews and everything else. So it was tough. There was a lot of tense moments with that, where like every day, and that was a 13-month investigation, and I got called out a lot. I was going around the clock sometimes, and it was pretty intense because you just didn't know what was going to pop off. You end your shift, and you think it's quiet, and the wire room calls you, and you're back out on the street, you know, a few hours later, and just hoping and praying that they're not going to do a robbery, or you're going to have another body as a result of it. But it's a slow burn. You know, you have to build your case, and building this case, and I talk about it in the book, a big part of the book, part 2. I talk about it, and it's a gradual process. You know, it's just like climbing a ladder, one step at a time, step at a time. But it's tenuous. It's a tightrope walk too.
Yeah, you know, and that's the thing too. And I'll get to that quintuple homicide in a bit, because it bears kind of its own story, of course. And it was, as you said, it was one of the last cases you had before you retired. But 2001, doesn't matter what you were doing in law enforcement, doesn't matter what rank you had, everybody was affected. And even though nobody from the New York State Police was killed that day, many have since died of illnesses related to their work down at the site. 9/11 hit. At this point, you got about 15 years in the job. Tell me about, I don't know if you were able to get down to the site that day, but when you got down there, just helping out and what you saw down there.
Well, I didn't go down there, and I'll tell you that story. So I remember we were in the barracks, and we're going through, you know, early. There's a bunch of us in the back room. We had a big back room. We had 7 investigators and a senior. And one of the guys comes in and says, "Hey, my wife just called. She said a plane hit the World Trade Center." Right? And I used to work maintenance down at World Trade Center when I was in college.
Oh, really?
You know, janitorial service. Yeah, at 32B, the union. And anyway, so we turn on the TVs and we see it. And we see other plane hit. Like, oh my God. As it so happened, I'd been working a case since that January, and I had a Middle Eastern Arabic-speaking informant that I'd been running since January. And I had been recording Egyptian targets and Lebanese targets in my patrol area in all hours of the day and night. A big, huge immigration scam and some other things. And I had some really fruitful targets. So when those planes hit, I discovered one of the few, if not the only guy in the New York State Police on an Arabic-speaking informant. I was one of the more senior individuals. My senior investigator, my supervisor says, do you want to go down to the city? It was about 2 days later to putting a detail together. We already had uniforms going down and everything else. And I said, no, I'll stay. And she says, you're going to have the calls for the next 48 hours to, could be a week. And I said, that's okay. I'll stay. I said, it's going to be a cluster down there, you know? So everybody's going to have the thumb up their rear end. It's going to be a cluster. I'm better off here working my informant. And I called him that afternoon, and I met with him that night. Brought him in through the rear door of the barracks. First time I brought him into the barracks. Yeah, it was an incredible time. I've lost 2 classmates as a result of 9/11 sickness. I still see people that I know over the last few years that have been lost. I thank God every day that I decided not to go down there because I know people in my unit had that were down there for a little bit, have developed some cancers. But for me, I was more valuable. I had my informant, and then I ended up, because I had so many targets up in the area, I ended up doing sweeps with the FBI as part of Operation Pent Bomb. So they were coming and knocking on the door, and I'll go see Terry, talk to Terry. Hey, we're looking for this guy, and we can't. Yeah, he works over here. Let's go. We'll go to local pizzeria, right? We're looking for this guy. I got his address. Here's where he lives with his in-laws or whatever. And we were picking up these individuals under whatever holds they had, whatever the feds had. Not all of them though. And I was still running my informant, and then he became invaluable. I ran him for 5 years. So I ran him from January 2001 up to about 2006. Less, involved with stuff because he moved out of the area the last year of it, but still in touch and still giving me intel on certain things. And I'd either make arrests in my area that I could, felony arrests for different things, different charges, or I'd pass it on to the Joint Terrorist Task Force. Our state police contacts there.
And again, it was an invaluable thing during that time because unfortunately it came at the cost of a devastating terrorist attack. But networking after that between local agencies, state agencies, and federal agencies was never better. It changed a lot. And you saw, like you talked about earlier, you saw that shift pre 9/11 to post 9/11, especially as an investigator. And what was interesting, you get over to Troop K in May of 2004. Not too long after that, the very next year, as part of working with the task force, Safe Streets, and this was something that started on the more community level, Safe Streets, Safer City. We've heard of that. This was something entirely different because you're working not only, of course, if you have anything terrorist related, it goes to JTTF, you're working violent gangs. And it was something at that time where even at the local level, even if it wasn't terrorist related, if there was anybody involved in any sort of an organization carrying out criminal acts, there was a different attitude, it feels like, post 9/11. So partnering up, sometimes you know how it is with, listen, and the NYPD and the feds have notoriously clashed heads. I don't know how it was with the state police and the feds, but how was that relationship? And tell me about some of those investigations.
Yeah, real quick, let me backtrack. I was in the city in 93 when the World Trade Center bombing happened in 93. Right. I was in with my unit. I was running the surveillance there, and we broke off from our target, the mob guy, and we're in the city, and all of a sudden, all the alarms are going off. We're in the city firehouse up in Harlem. And what happened? A transformer blew in the World Trade Center. And from having worked there in building maintenance, like, no goddamn transformer blew there. So I said, all right, everybody, let's go. We're getting off the rock. We're going back to Queens. We're going back to the precinct over there. We're going to pick up our cars. We're going to get out of Dodge. We didn't no sooner get into our cars because we had, undercover funny cars, and our beepers are going off, right? And we're like on potential recall. So I remember the 93 bombing. So when it happened in 2001, it's like, oh my gosh, here we are again. So working the Safe Streets Task Force, there was an FBI agent that I worked with, great guy. And he was, I had met him earlier in my career because I was involved in the whole NYPD transit before they merged. Right. A lot of the transit cops got locked up from the union for stealing members' funds. As an FBI investigation, our SIU unit was involved. I got involved with doing some work in that case, put a guy in witness protection, drove him over across the state lines to Danbury to meet an FBI agent. But I met this FBI agent, Jim Asanio, during that assignment. Then when he did the Operation Pent Bomb, one of the agents who's in the area is Jim Asanio. So when it comes time to go to Safe Streets Task Force and I volunteer and say, yeah, I'll go, I'm working with Jim Asanio. And the great thing about Asanio is he was a trooper for 4 years. And he comes from a law enforcement family. He had a lot of connections. So working with him was absolutely wonderful. We clicked right away. We hooked up with a cop from the city that we were investigating that area, who was fantastic. And the three of us were the task force to begin with. We built up the case till we got to the point where we got wires. And I suggested to the district attorney in the county, the assistant that was handling the case, I said, why don't we go enterprise corruption rather than a conspiracy? Because Assanio had done a conspiracy case across the Hudson River in another municipality, working with another state police investigator, happened to be a classmate of mine. So the ADA, the assistant district attorney, was like, I've never done one of those. And I gave him an article written by Linda Cantoni from the Queen's DA's office. And I said, she talks about 4 cases there. I worked 3 of those that she talks about when I was down in the city. Let's try it. He went for it, but now we had to deliver, right? So you had to get certain predicate acts and everything else. It took a while, like I said, slow burn, but we ended up bringing an enterprise corruption case. We listened to 24 to 25,000 phone calls over a summer from like June to August or September. I think it was the first gang prosecution outside of New York City to use enterprise corruption. It was one of the first cases in the country that used rap lyrics. I knew this gang had 3 tracks of rap songs and lyrics. I knew every song on every track, and I actually got certified in New York State Court as a rap expert. And I testified, and nobody challenged me. I mean, I was because I knew all their lyrics, and the 2 defendants that ended up going to trial just sitting there, and they're like, I knew it all because one of the guys we flipped, who became our informant, him and I used to, on downtime when we weren't doing prep around lunchtime, we'd go back and forth spitting rhymes, and it was kind of an exercise to get him to open up and prepare him for his testimony and just confirm everything from the rap lyrics. Because what I was doing, I wrote the affidavits, the eavesdropping affidavits, because of my legal background. They trusted me to do it, and the DA would go over it. But I was connecting actual crimes, lyrics to actual crimes that they talked about, and then our informant can confirm that. So it was quite an interesting case, and there's been other cases that's become a bone of contention with. Can you use rap lyrics? Is it art? And I got cross-examined on that. But the difference in our case was that we were connecting actual lyrics to factual crimes, whereas the investigations that they were using that came under scrutiny years later, they were using it to kind of pigeonhole and stereotype. They didn't have actual crimes that they were lining up. And that's the big difference. It's as if somebody wrote a note, I did this crime on this date and whatever. So that became really, really solid probable cause.
No, I mean, and you see the correlation now. Like, I can't get into today's rap. Today's rap is terrible. I like the old school hip hop, like the 90s hip hop, because there's more variety back then. That's what I listened to. But you've seen recent cases. There was a popular rapper, for those of you who are my age, the guy I'm going to mention, Bobby Shmurda, who I can't say the title. Yeah, there you go. So I can't say the title of the popular song he had, but you know what song I'm talking about. And that song, for as hot as it was in 2014-15, ended up getting him some jail time because, to your point, he was talking about certain things. The part, for those of you that know the song, Mitch caught a body about a week ago. Mitch actually did catch a body about a week ago. So quite a few people went to jail because of that song. So it's a thing. It is a thing.
I got cross-examined by the defense attorney, and he said, investigator, what do you know about rap? And I started off going, well, what do you want to know, counselor? Do you want to know about East Coast or West Coast? Do you want to know about the beef between them? Do you want me to start in the projects in the South Bronx and the Sugar Hill Gang? Or what do you want me to go into? And he kept cross-examining me, and then they did a sidebar, and we took a break after that, and the assistant district attorney was smiling ear to ear. And I get out in the hallway, and I go, what's going on? What was said there? I couldn't catch what was going on. The judge asked the defense attorney, where are you going with this witness? And the defense attorney says, well, I want to question him on this, and this. And the judge leaned over and he goes, because he's killing you, counselor. I'd be quiet. So, and everything I said, not once are the defendants writing notes or anything else, because everything I'm testifying to, I could just see it in their face, like, damn, how does he know that? Damn, how does he know that? You know?
Never judge a book by its cover.
Well, yeah, and the thing is that I studied those lyrics. I went through them. I was totally immersed in that case. Just like working in an organized crime, Italian organized crime. You totally immerse yourself. You inhabit their lives. So you get to know what they're doing sometimes before they're knowing it, because you're starting to think like them and everything else. So, you know, whatever group, whatever organized criminality you're investigating, it's the same thing.
If you're going to make a song just for any genre, not just hip hop, and you recently committed any crimes, you may want to keep the subject matter a bit light. Just a word of advice.
Don't write about it.
Don't write about it. It's like, I have to clean up the language a bit. There's a great scene in The Wire. Idris Elba's character is seeing a guy take notes after. It's like, I have to bleep out.
Yeah, I know the scene you're talking about. Yeah.
He's like, are you taking notes on a criminal effing conspiracy? Same thing. Same philosophy.
Absolutely. But hey,
yeah,
you know, they don't necessarily have to be smart.
Job security, man.
Job security. I tell it to my students all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get to your teaching momentarily too, because again, you've done a whole hell of a lot, as we've been talking about tonight. You don't retire rather quietly, because my goodness, those last 6 or 7 months of your case, here's a glorious quintuple homicide in January of 2007. Now, set the stage. You talked about gangs earlier. This is gang related?
No, but it's drug related. So I was just 7 weeks released from the gang case back in Major Crimes. It's mid-January, and you know, get woken up, house fire, blah blah blah. Get to the scene. There were 3 kids on a tarp, 13, 10, and 6, and there's still a body inside, and they think it's the mother. Turns out it's the mother and the father. The father was shot in the chest. She was shot, and he was put on top of her, and the couch was put on top of him and burned, and kind of fused into each other. So we had an incredible group of in our FIU, our forensic identification unit, who did that crime scene. But yeah, I'm standing outside the tarp, and I'm looking at the oldest kid, and his his left wrist is nearly severed off, and it ended up post-mortem he'd have 83 stab wounds on his body. But we actually, my partner and I picked up one of the guys who got arrested for it. Ended up, getting arrested for it. We picked him up maybe several hours later, coming out of a trailer with him and his younger brother and his brother's girlfriend. Brought him in for questioning. Very long day, as you can imagine. There was another group that was the primary investigators with me and my partner, these 2 male investigators and a female and male investigator. And but they brought in everybody. They brought in the cavalry for that case. Obviously, it was making national, international news. And we put the case down in a week, and it was just such a great coordinated effort. If I've ever been proud of my agency, that was like one of those shining moments when you see the state police at its best and the resources it can bring, and how the people can work together, and no egos involved. Let's get the case done. Let's put this down. And everybody, just everybody that did everything on that case. It was a real team effort. And you had hundreds of people. I mean, we were one of the lead crews and really involved in the intimate aspects of the case. And I would later testify at trial with that. I was retired. Interesting case. My buddy from law school, the NYPD lieutenant, was one of the murderer's attorneys. So he cross-examined me.
Oh, wow. Well, talk about a full circle moment.
Yeah. So, that was that's a case that doesn't leave you, especially when you have 3 young boys. And it was tragic, and that was drug related. But so here's the interesting twist. What was connected is there was a guy that me and my partner flipped, a drug dealer, and he came in reluctantly. Him and his girl were going down Atlantic City. I convinced him to come in and talk to us. That day he did, but then he was kind of sketchy with us and evasive. So coming out of working this Safe Streets Task Force case, we'd work with the county narco people. I called them up, the sergeant there. I says, hey, this is what I need. Does you guys have any informants? No, this guy. Oh, yeah. They put 2 buys into him in a matter of 2 days. And lo and behold, he gets locked up and he's in another jurisdiction. They find my card on him and he asks if he can call me, right? So we go over there, we play the game, this, that, and the other thing, and we flip him and we get him to tell us some skinny on the guys they were, geeking that night. They bought an 8-ball from him. And there was very damning conversation the day of the murders that wasn't even out in the news yet that one of the suspects had said to him. So that became pretty crucial. But then here's like small world. And I talk about this in the book. this guy was a known drug dealer, operated between different gangs. It wasn't gang related. However, the prior October, I was at the shooting, a local cop got shot. And I was at the hospital ER with him. Thankfully, he survived. He had his vest and everything. But the perp who did it thought he was going to go south. Chest was cut open. He was in the next ER room. He ends up surviving. He shot that officer with a gun that was supplied by the guy that me and my partner flipped in the quintuple homicide. And the reason the kid who shot the cop bought the gun was because guys in the gang that I'd investigated prior had run up on his crib, him and his girl, sexually molested his girl, threatened to shoot him if he didn't tell him where his product and where his money was. So as I say in the book, this is a tale of the unbelievable if it wasn't true, but that's the urban crime scene. You know, that's the real life. They say, you know, reality is stranger than fiction in a lot of ways. So, you know, that kind of small world.
Right. And they don't call them narco terrorists for nothing. Think about
you're talking about the Mexican mafia and stuff like that, the real narco terrorists. But yeah, even a guy like him in a community, the impact that he has, sure, he's part of that causal chain for 5 people being dead.
Mm-hmm. Children among them.
Yeah, 13, 10, and 6, and the 6-year-old. You know, my youngest daughter was around that age at the time. You know, so. But that was really me really making the point where I was going to leave the job, because I was going to go with 20. I had my practice, this and that, but I loved it. I loved the state police. I loved being in the BCI. I told my wife I was going to stay for 25. That she didn't kill me is a miracle. But I hit that point with that, and I just realized I was burned out. I was just burnt. I was done. And I told her I'm going to make my move to retire by the end of the year. And I talk about it in the book. And I'm like, you know, I'll get a teaching job. I'll ramp up the practice. And then on that quintuple homicide, there was an incident that happened where some supervisors really, really ticked me off. Wasn't one of my most shining moments. I threw a few chairs and stuff, but it just pushed me to the point where I'm like, you know what, there's other things I can be doing at this point. I don't have to be dealing with this micromanagement and all this other nonsense. So as fate would have it, that during that case, I saw the announcement for the teaching faculty opening. I was only looking to get back into adjuncting. I was an adjunct professor for 10 years at Mercy College, now Mercy University. And it was a full time. I applied, and then 6 months later, I get a call. Hey, we want you to come and join our faculty.
And along the way, too, you got the second highest honor before you left from the state police. What is the highest you guys get? Is it a Medal of Honor?
The highest is the Brummer Award. That's the highest award. And the second highest is the Superintendent's Commendation Award, or Superintendent's Award. So I got the Superintendent's Award for the gang case, which was an honor, and, you know, to be recognized for your work and to that level. And I was able to go up to Albany for the ceremony with my wife and my 3 children. The older 2 were in college, and the youngest was in middle school. And it was a great day. And then I was, that was May, and I was retired August. The following month, I'd get that call, and I had made a promise to my wife I'd leave by the end of that year. And I got the call, and it was accelerated. It was sooner than she thought by 4 months.
And there you go. And I'll just a brief aside before we get into your teaching in the book. Is the Brummer Award, because generally you hear it said about the NYPD Medal of Honor, it's not an award you want to win because it usually means you died. Is the Brummer Award the same thing? Well,
I mean, the NYPD medal, they have Medal of Honor winners who are survivors. So, but the Brummer Award is the top award. I mean, yeah, posthumously, some people have gotten it, sure. But there are my old supervisor, she had won it. She was the first female to win it on the New York State Police. So, I mean, yeah, you survived, but generally you've done something really above and beyond the above and beyond. But yeah, I mean, Medal of Honor, yeah, there's been posthumous awards, but they're also living, breathing, walking, retiring NYPD Medal of Honor winners.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one of them, which, you know, I know, Scott Strauss, who was an emergency service cop out of Truck One. That being said, you know, it plays perfectly into the book, which we'll chronicle momentarily. Teaching is a whole different ballgame. You have a lot of young, curious, impressionable minds. And teaching post 2020, especially when it comes to matters pertaining to law and law enforcement, is a whole different ballgame. What type of kids are walking into your classroom, and what's your philosophy in terms of just molding them based off your own experiences, but keeping it real with them?
Yeah, so I'm very blunt and I'm very straightforward, and I don't BS anybody. And students will sniff out a fake or a phony really quick. I've been always genuine with them, and I always tell them, I says, look, I don't ask anything of you. I've never asked of myself or any of my children. And you can go talk to my children; they've all survived. That's my running joke. But the students know I care. Even when I complain and bitch them out for something, not doing well on a test or something, I really do think they know that I care, and I really do. And it's funny, my university had I'm one of three CSU professors, distinguished professors in the system, one of the three at our university, and they've been having a series of provost lectures. So our PR person, she turned it into a book launch for me and a book signing. So I'm signing some books, and they had a reception after my lecture, and my wife is talking to my former students, and they're telling her a funny story, like, oh, he was so mad. He was so mad. And he put this thing up on the board, and nobody had even heard that term yet. This kind of modern term, dilligaff, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And we didn't even know what it means. And he was talking about our excuses and this and that. And he says his response is going to be dilligaff. And they were telling my wife the story, and they were laughing at it. But boy, we never forgot it. We did well the next test, and he was really proud of us. And one of those young former students, she's a lawyer, had her own practice for years with a firm now, and the other has her own marketing company.
Nice.
And my wife has heard stories over the last few years, like, oh man, he told me this, he told me that, whatever. And we kind of laugh about it, but if it makes a mark, if it makes an impression. I had a former student who's a detective second grade in NYPD in Brooklyn. And he called me a few summers ago, and he said, I always have run through my mind, Professor, what would Dwyer do? What would Dwyer say? What would Dwyer? And I'm like, I was kind of honored, 10 years on the job at the NYPD, and he's still taking lessons from criminal procedure law, because I'm big on the law. It says, do the job right. Do it the right way. Follow the law. It's not hard. All right. Be smarter than the average bear. Be smarter than the perp, but do it the right way. You can get the job done. So, I'm there now to guide, because college in a way has become sort of like an extension of high school, unfortunately. I don't want to get into a whole education discussion, but
right.
I teach upper level courses. Students come to me. They kind of know my reputation around campus. They kind of know what I'm about. The ones that don't, they learn real quick. I do have a good rapport with my students, but I'm there for them, and they know I'm there for them. And I've had students actually who have gotten Fs in my class, or who have had to withdraw because they're failing, and they come back and they've apologized to me. And I said, don't apologize. I don't take it personal, but it's you. It's your future. So I like to see the turnaround, and they're great. Like, they're all great people. They all come in with different backgrounds, different baggage, and you have to adapt to the different generations. I've seen the shift, but I've seen the shift, but they're good people. I've got students just a few years ago that are sergeants now in the PD, or they're in grad school. They're lawyers. They all get there. They all figure it out. Sometimes I'm there to give them the boot in the rear end to kind of wake them up. Sometimes I'm the first person by the time they come to my 300 level class that tells them, sunshine and rainbows do not come out of your butt crack. You got to work. You got to work for it. And here's what I expect. And I tell every class, I do not have 30 expectations to meet. You have one to meet, and that's my expectations. So I have very strict requirements for getting a letter of recommendation from me for law school or graduate school. And I've had students say, I'm working hard to get my GPA because I want a recommendation from you. And that's nice to hear. But, I'm there to be not only a professor in the classroom, but kind of hopefully, I like to think, be kind of like a guide. Mm-hmm. Not a role model, but just like say, look, here's the possibilities. And look, I'm telling you this because I've made my mistakes. I'm not up here saying I'm perfect. And I can talk to you about it, and I have real life experience. And I think that's what the students really appreciate, is that the real life experience, because admittedly, I have worked a lot of different, I've done the lawyer thing. I've been there. I've done the corrections. I've done even short time, but I've done the courts, and I did a full police career, and I've handled a lot of different things, so I can speak to these topics that'll come up.
And again, it's a profound impact that you're making, which speaking on topics, product placement there, product placement here, putting that into a book I can speak to you, the process. Writing it is not easy. Chronicling these thoughts, jotting them down, the written word is not easy at all. What motivated you to want to write it, and what was your process like to put it together?
So I've written 3 textbooks, and my last textbook is on Homeland Security law, and it's been adopted by several universities. And but that had 1,400 footnotes, extensive footnotes.
Yeah.
Not doing that again. I was always interested in creative writing. Like I said, my dream was to get my MFA from Columbia, so this is kind of like a dream deferred. Got to a point in life where I was writing plays. I've been writing plays for the last almost 10 years. I've been doing some other writing. I've been the police liability and litigation columnist for police1.com since 2008, and I'm now one of their featured columnists. So I've always been writing, and then that creative writing bug never went away. And talking to my wife about it, she says, you should just do it. I found the program I wanted to go to. I did it. It was fantastic 2.5 years. I worked my butt off. In some ways, I think I worked harder for my MFA, which is a terminal degree, than my law school. But I worked hard for law school. I just forgot. And this book was my master's thesis. I worked under a great mentor, Mike Lennon, who's a Pulitzer Prize and National Book Award nominee. And then the play that I wrote, which is actually based upon some research I did about female police officers and their experiences on the job, play called Depositions. That was my MFA thesis. And that's actually, it's got a reading next week at SUNY Cortland. It's had a few stage readings. It premiered at the Scranton Fringe Festival at the end of September. And I'm looking to get it down in Connecticut, and I would love someday off Broadway, but small venue in Manhattan, but still chipping away at it. So it was always something in me, and I just finally pulled the trigger. And I didn't start to do a memoir. This book started out totally different until I spoke with a former colleague who was an adjunct here. She relocated to another state, but she's retired correction officer. And she's a licensed clinical social worker. And she's done counseling for law enforcement. She counseled the cops at the Sandy Hook shooting that responded to that in Connecticut. And then she counseled first responders at the Mandalay Bay, the Las Vegas shooting. So we were talking, and I was interviewing her. I was in full academic mode. There's a different type of book I was going to write it from the third person. And she says, hey, you ever been in counseling? No, I'm the type of person that causes people to go to seek counseling, And she goes, no, knowing what I know about you and your career and just listening to you talk and the things she said, you should just go talk to somebody. And I had a bright idea. This is going to be great for the book. I'm going to be great. Told my wife, this is going to be great for the book. And she's probably thinking, yeah, nutsy, you should have been in counseling long ago. So I went and I got a counselor whose father's a cop, brother's a cop, counseled a lot of former troopers, present troopers, other PD. And I did it. And in the process, I found out, wow, it was good for, not just for the book, it was good for me, because my wife and I talked about the job more than we ever have in all my years as retired, 16 years by that time. And we talked more about the job. And I know you had a guy recently on the show, your last show, talking about EMDR.
Yeah, right? Joe Balamonte.
I did brain spotting. And it was kind of incredible. It was really wild. You forget things about the job. You forget more than you remember. I was lucky in writing the book, and I talk about it in the opening prologue. I had 3 big bins, plastic bins of paperwork, documents. I chronicled everything. The DAs used to love me because give me Dwyer's notes. And, I could be cross-examined. Let me go to my notes counsel. Yes, on this date, this time, this was the weather. This is what, boom, boom, boom. So that helped me in writing the book. And yeah, it was, writing any book is hard. Writing about yourself is really, really hard. But I did it, and it was a great exercise. It was a great learning experience for the next one I'm working on, this true crime one I'm working on.
And there you go. And again, I'll be linking it in the description of the show notes. Again, the book is The Badge Between Us, Duty, Marriage, and Family by one Terrence P. Dwyer. So if Depositions ever hits the Schubert Theater here in New Haven, I live not that far away from the Schubert Theater. Let me know, because I'll gladly pull up.
I will let you know. Let me tell you, I am working my way to get it out there. It's gotten great reviews, great feedback. So yeah, and the book is available at Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com.
Absolutely. Like I said, I'll be linking it for those of you that are interested. Now time for the rapid fire segment. But first, of course, A word from our friends over at Granite State. Hey there, firefighters and fire buffs. If you're tuning into the Mike the New Haven podcast, you know the value of reliable gear. At Granite State Fire Helmets, we're proud to introduce the TL2, our premium leather Phoenix fire helmet. The TL2 is all about comfort, durability, and that timeless style you trust. And here's the best part. All in-stock inventory usually ships within 24 hours, so you'll have it in your hands in no time. Plus, our company is proudly owned and operated by firemen, so you know we've got your back and understand exactly what you need out there on the front lines. So don't wait. Gear up with the TL2 today. Granite State Fire Helmets, where tradition meets innovation, and where firemen have you covered. Now, and again, this is not your fault. It's a great thing you did this. Lately, I got to get better at the rapid fire because so many of my guests have answered the questions over the course of the conversation that the rapid fire may just be down to one question. So I'm going to have to figure it out on the fly, and that's fine. We will. 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 hit and run answers from you, although it's not really hit and run. If a long answer is a long answer, I don't care. We're not strict here. First question, hardest transition, corrections to courts or courts to state police?
I think from civilian to corrections.
Well, that's a good one too, especially considering what you dealt with early on, like we were talking about earlier. Besides patrol's always dangerous because you never know what's going to happen on patrol. What was the most dangerous assignment of your career?
I think the gang case, because I was left alone a lot on the street, didn't give us the manpower. A whole separate issue I talk about with my bosses in the book, but that case, I nearly got ambushed by 2 gang members in like dead of night. It was only because of a good young cop on the wire that got me on the wire. I was probably seconds from maybe near fatal turn.
Yeah, no, and that's the difference between you and I talking right now and you being a face on the Officer Down Memorial page. So glad to see that did not happen. Third, besides the obvious, like you just said, follow the law, do the job in accordance with the law, what was the most important lesson law school taught you that helped you most on the job?
Law school?
Mm-hmm.
Something that I learned in the academy, and I saw our behavior modification officer said attention to detail. And I even learned how important that is, even more so in law school. I'm very specific with my students. Words have meaning. So pay attention to detail in everything you do. Mm-hmm. So it really amplified that attention to detail, that specificity that we really required in the law.
Absolutely. Fourth, and again, besides the quintuple homicide at the end and early on getting to the Bureau working that corruption probe, what's another case that if you look back on that time as an investigator, you say, wow, that was a really defining point in my career?
I don't know defining, but this is a unique case where a guy had his kid taken from Child Protective Services because the kid had a spiral fracture. And he had married a woman. She was Guatemalan or somewhere, but Central America. But she didn't speak English, that good of English. And he was an older white guy. And I got the case to investigate it as, child abuse. And I went there and I was talking to the guy, and it's like something wasn't right. Something wasn't hidden. Like this guy wouldn't abuse his kid. And long story short is I ended up championing this guy and his wife. And his defense attorney called me one day. It was a big firm, well-known firm. And he calls me and he goes, investigator, I don't know what kind of mojo you have over my client, but he still insists on calling and talking to you before he calls me. And I said, well, counselor, I happen to be on your client's side. I investigated this. I spoke with the pediatrician, everything else. Yes, spiral fracture is indicative of, twisting with the parents. It could also happen a certain way. And from the description, it looks like it was something of the way she fell against the couch, the pressure rolled and it twisted the arm. So they had taken his child and they had a death in the county. They were paranoid. So now they're going overboard and they'd taken their child. And I talked to the CPS investigator and he goes, he did something really slick on me. I go, what? He goes, he asked for an attorney. I go, you took his kid, right? Well, he did all the talking. The wife did it. Do you know that she's Hispanic? She doesn't speak only a little bit of English. She's learning English. The guy didn't know it. So fast forward, I'm retiring and the guy calls me to his house. Now this is about 6 years later. Mm-hmm. And as a retirement gift, he gave me a briefcase that I used for probably the first decade of my teaching. And he introduced me to his daughter. And he said, this is the man who brought you back to mommy and daddy.
Wow.
And I mean, and I didn't break down crying on that guy's front lawn. You know, and he was a guy that I stayed in touch with. He just stayed in touch with me. And I just did the right thing by him because, you know, so it's not always about being a criminal investigator. It's not always about putting handcuffs on people. It's about getting to the truth. And that was a situation where this may not be a crime. Let me delve more into this. And it turned out, you know, not to be. CPS gave the kid back. They sued CPS. They got money and everything else. But not a defining moment, but something I will remember.
Absolutely. As well you should. That's a great story, and I'm glad you told it. And the last question, the rapid fire, you know, it meant a lot to you to work corrections. It's not easy. It meant a lot to you to be a courts officer. But to have been a New York State trooper, that was the job you had the longest of your law enforcement career. When you look back, a lot of good moments, a lot of difficult moments, as you chronicled in your book, which I look forward to reading. But when you look back, how much does it mean to you to have worn that patch?
Oh, it means everything. I'm very proud to have been the New York State Police. I didn't always agree with the division. Anybody who's worked with division knows what I'm talking about.
Yes.
But the people are superior. The people I worked with were superior. I was blessed to work with great units. I was proud to represent the people of the state of New York. I was proud to be a trooper. I was proud of all that I put into it and my career. And I was proud to be counted amongst those who were part of the Long Gray Line.
Absolutely. Well said. Stick around. We'll talk off air. Again, the book is The Badge Between Us, Duty, Marriage, and Family, which you can get on Amazon. And, of course, what else was the other service you mentioned?
Barnes & Noble.
Barnes & Noble as well, where you can purchase this book. Again, he was nice enough to send me a copy, which I look forward to reading in the coming days. Besides the book, if you have any shout-outs to anyone or anything, the floor is yours. Fire away.
To my wife and children, they're my world. You know, my wife and I will be married 41 years in June. I have 3 wonderful kids, and I have 7 grandchildren. So just say hello to all them, and just all the men and women are still out there working, doing the job, and all our first responders. You know, it's day in, day out, 24/7. You always got to be there. Always got to show up.
Mm-hmm. Amen to that. Amen to that. Like I said, stick around. We'll talk off air. Fun episode. The 2 hours flew right by. This was really a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Coming up next in the Mike the New Haven podcast, I did the episode yesterday. It's going to air this Friday. If you grew up in New York City or around the New York area like I did, I didn't live in the city. I have family in the city. I grew up in Connecticut, but we still get all the New York channels. You saw him on NBC for 27 years. He covered about every major sports event there was to cover. Len Berman's here for episode 410. On Friday, 6 p.m. Did the interview yesterday. It was a lot of fun. You'll get that pre-recorded edition this Friday at 6. And then next Monday for another volume of the best, the bravest interviews with the FDNYs. He's currently the chief of department for the Greenwich Fire Department. Prior to that was a battalion chief for the FDNY. Joe McHugh will be here for that edition of Best, the Bravest next Monday, live at 6 p.m. Excuse me. Now, as far as the outro song is concerned, for those of you listening on the audio side, from their 1994 debut album, Under the Table and Dreaming, one of my personal favorites. They've made several appearances on this program. Dave Matthews Band is back, and they return this time with What Would You Say? In the meantime, on behalf of retired New York State Trooper and attorney and professor, as well as author Terry Dwyer, I'm Mike Colón. This has been Volume 23 of The Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide. Take care of yourselves, and we will see you next time.